Σε λίγα δευτερόλεπτα θα είμαστε έτοιμοι να ξεκινήσουμε.
Just a bit more patience, please. We'll start very, very soon.
Έτοιμοι πλέον να ξεκινήσουμε.
Okay, I think we can start. I'd like to welcome you to this European seminar, organized, of course, within the framework of the European Left Forum. The topic that we will be looking into today is global warming and the ecological transition. This is an event that is taking place at a very, very specific moment in the life of all of us. And I think, of course, in normal circumstances, we would all be sitting in the same meeting room. We would probably be able to exchange much more directly. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has sort of forced us to reorganize the way we work. And is also somehow telling us that when you abuse the production system, as we have done in the past, well, sometimes you end up having to adapt to the consequences of that. And this is why we are now meeting as we are today online, but with an extremely interesting topic, I think. Today, I think citizens, but also governments, everyone has to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, but we also have to deal with other crises, an economic crisis, a social crisis, and an environmental one. And I included there, of course, the climate crisis. I hope and I think that we will have the ability and the chance today to talk about those various dimensions of the crisis with the guests that have accepted to be with us today. And I'd like to thank them and welcome them. I'd like maybe to briefly mention them. Thomas Weitz, first co-chair of the European Green Party. Thank you very much. We have Marisa Matias, who's an MEP from the Bloco de Esquerda, Portugal. And she should join us very soon, I think, hopefully. We also have with us Jens Holm, who is an MP of the Left Party of Sweden. I'm sorry, but we have several microphones that have been turned on, including David Sid's microphone. Can we ask Mr. Sid to please mute his microphone? Thank you. I was saying, we also have with us Christiana Cherry Gambarelli from the Federation of Young European Greens. We have with us David Sid from Catalonia. We also have Inga Johansson from the Red Green Alliance, Denmark. and happy to see you. It's been a while. And then finally, we have with us from Norway, Mr. Asbjørn Wall. Sorry if I mispronounce your name, sir. Now, I'd like to immediately give the floor to Christina Baritaki, who is going to be in charge of coordinating a little bit of discussion tonight. Christina is a member of the Syriza department in charge of climate and the environment. She's also occupied important responsibilities in the Ministry of the Environment when Syriza was in charge. We also have with us Johanna Theodosiou, who's going to be in charge of more or less coordinating and managing the questions that will come to different channels for our guests. Thank you. I'll give the floor now to Christina. Thank you very much. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. I'd like myself also to welcome our speakers. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you to Yorgos also for these kinds of words of introduction. And thank you to everybody who's with us virtually, yes, due to the COVID-19 crisis, but at least we're happy to have you with us. I'd like also to thank our interpreters who will be helping us tonight and contributing to hopefully good communication tonight. Before I give the floor maybe to the first of our speakers, I'd like to bring you back a year ago. You might remember that a year ago we were very busy talking about the European Green Deal, which had just been announced at the time, and we were hoping that somehow green was going to be the main color in Europe in the coming years, and we were hoping very much that big changes would take place within Europe and also in our member states, and particularly we were hoping that the change would serve the interests also of younger generations. But I must say that a year later, of course, everything has been completely changed, and even though the current crisis that we face is not something that we could have expected, I think everything in this world is interrelated and interconnected. And I believe that when we talk about the crisis that we face today, I think we need to also speak about the climate change and our climate policy in Europe. I want to give the floor first to Thomas Weitz, who's going to talk about, I'm very sorry to have to say this, but Mrs. Baritaki's microphone level is very, very low. But Thomas Weitz, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and good evening to all of you. I think I have to turn off the translation now. Okay. Yes. So thank you very much for that invitation, and also for choosing this timely issue that we have to talk about actually how we can get out of the crisis that we have in the current moment, and combining that with a social and green and just transition, and the question how this can be done. As I saw the shared competence and the big competence with the panelists that I shared this panel with, I decided to focus on a topic where I bring in a lot of expertise and to deliver our ideas on a concrete example, which is agriculture. How comes? Just to give you a little bit of a background, I'm a railway workers boy. My father was a rail worker. My mom was from the countryside, so I stem from very simple background, and I decided to follow my mother's way and go into organic agriculture. So that's how also it comes that I bring some special competences here. I want to focus very much on the question on how we can actually use the enormous amounts of resources that the European Union is now releasing. Finally, I must say, with shared depth. So where the more wealthy countries stand together with the less wealthy countries to share the burden of recovery, which we very strongly supported. I think all of us together did, and we reached something here. How this enormous amounts of money shall be actually used or have to be used to not only serve the tackling of the climate crisis, but also serve the needs of citizens combined with that. And there I want to reflect a bit on the question of agro-industry versus agro-ecological models and organic models in these, let's say, frameworks. I will not spend too much time on describing how industrial agriculture is one of the main sources of global warming, one of the main sources of CO2, methane, nitrous oxygen emissions that actually cause the problem. So as industrial agriculture is a big problem, part of the problem today, everyone I think is aware of that more or less, and you can read up to the details on that. I want to go more deeper into the question of what does that do to our society. Agro-industry basically serves us in the first view, in the short-term view, serves us with comparably cheap food. Agro-industry claims that they have reached a situation where every citizen, or let's say we know nearly every citizen, can afford to buy their daily food and feed their children and themselves. Well, yes, this may look good in the first view, but it's not the whole truth. Because industrial agriculture causes a lot of damages, which then fire back on the public budgets, on the public as such. And it does that with a big impact on environment first. So who is suffering most from the effects of climate crisis, from the global warming? Well, it's the wealthy ones that can adopt. But it's the ones that have less means, which is countries, but also people within our citizens in our societies that have it hardest to adjust to global warming and that are affected most on global warming. So in that term, industrial agriculture is impacting more on rather poor or less wealthy people than on wealthy ones. But it's not only that. It's also the public that carries the side effects of industrial agriculture. And I want to give you an example from my region. In my region, we have a lot of pork production, 90,000 inhabitants, but more than 1 million pigs slaughtered every year. So you can imagine the amount of waste, of manure, of pork manure that is spread on our land. And the effect of that is that we have very high nitrate levels in our soil water. So our water provider has to bring water from the Alpine Ridge and mix it, has to drill new wells next to the river and mix the water. So we have one of the most expensive drinking waters in Austria, in my region, due to the pork farming. So every single citizen, because everyone needs to drink, actually pays the price for the so-called cheap pork production with their water bill. So you're externalizing the costs to the broad public while pretending that you're having a cheap product. This is just one of the examples. I could raise many more: pollution of the air, illnesses through the pollution, and so on. So the costs are externalized and not internalized into the produce, actually. Then on the food quality. Yes, we are having cheap food, but what kind of food do we get there? It's food that is not always, but very often showing high levels of pesticides. It's food that is low quality in terms of vitamins and mineralization. It is food that sometimes carry illnesses that come out of industrial production, like multi-resistant bacteria, which are an effect of overusing of antibiotics in industrial agriculture. And who, again, are the ones that are not so easily able to afford organic or agroecological food in the supermarket? It's against the weaker parts of our society that pay the highest health bill for food that actually makes them sick. So again, this is a social dimension that we have to see. And already there, I want to mention, it's also based on the subsidy schemes that we have across Europe, that we're still subsidizing industrial production much more than organic or ecological production. And through this, we're keeping up the disparity, and we're still preventing to have farmers producing healthy food for all citizens and not just for the few wealthy ones that can afford in the supermarkets. So we need to change our subsidy scheme, like the CAP and so on, towards the goal of serving all European population with maximum healthy food as much as we can produce it. Then the effects on the rural structures of industrial agriculture, which are struggling our farmers' families, especially the small and medium-sized farms, because the price competition of industrial agriculture is so harmful to the regional structures, to the family farms that we have, and is causing a lot of farms to close down their businesses, which has a massive impact on rural areas, because a lot of workplaces are linked to the agriculture functioning in a region. Not that the agriculture only need handcraft and so on, but we see that in regions where the farmers close their doors, regions are emptying out, and the only ones that stay behind are again the ones that can't leave. We see elderly people staying in the countryside, but young people, due to the lack of jobs, due to the lack of income, go to the cities and leave the countryside, which has a very negative impact on workplaces across the Union, because industrial agriculture doesn't serve us with too many workplaces. It also has a negative impact on animal welfare, but I'm not going to go too far into that now. So what kind of recovery do we need, and why is it so urgent that we talk about that? Just because there is this huge amounts of money now used. And the question is, are we using this money to bail out McDonald's, or are we using that money to rethink some of our structures across Europe and to actually support the ones that work on the land, the ones that stay in the region, that offer real workplaces, and that serve the population with healthy food? This is the key question. And for organic and agroecological, also there we need to change the subsidy schemes. We need to support regional production, also regional marketing. We need to support all these fantastic new projects that appear, which are community-based agriculture, which are cooperatives, which are food co-ops, and which are direct marketing schemes between farming sector and citizens. Because also this serves citizens with an opportunity to buy high quality food from the region for low prices. Because if you undergo or sideline the wholesalers, which are basically simply profit oriented, if you sideline them, you can even buy high level, high quality organic food from your region for reasonable prices. And this kind of marketing schemes are still not supported in the way they have to be supported via the subsidy schemes or the recovery money that we are on the edge to invest into Europe and to actually help the society to get out of the crisis. And coming back to the actual question on climate change, if you look into the potential of agriculture, of organic and ecological agriculture to become a part of the climate solution by sequestering CO2 into our soils, not just emitting less, but actually having negative emissions by sequestering more than is emitted, by sustaining artificial fertilizer with green fertilizer, by taking care for the soil, not leaving it open in the winter, preventing erosion, and so on and so forth. You see that there's a lot of public goods that come out of ecological transition in agriculture, but not just that. For organic and agroecological agriculture, we need many more people working on the land, working in the landscape, and there could be a lot of green jobs created across Europe, serving public interest, serving the job question, serving the climate question, and supporting European citizens with healthy food. This is a kind of a program that we think makes sense for the European Union recovery, just focused on agriculture now, but I think that kind of logic can apply to many fields of our living, to many fields of our economy, and to many fields of our production. Thank you for your attention.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ τον Johansson.
Very sorry, thank you, Mr. Vice, but the sound level of Mrs. Baritaki is extremely low, and it's almost impossible to hear what she says. Extremely sorry about this, but the connection also seems to be a little bit weak.
Τώρα ακούτε. Ωραία, οκ. Συγγνώμη γι' αυτό, με ειδοποίησαν για κάποιο πρόβλημα.
Okay, very sorry. We'll try to do our best. I think Thomas has very clearly showed and explained to us how agriculture can become somehow one dimension of the solution, and really be one of these important dimensions that we can use maybe better to solve part of the climate problem, also feed people with a quality product. And also, indeed, I think what he also clearly mentioned, which I find very interesting, is this local dimension, and this need maybe to reduce the distance between producers and consumers, and have a more close relationship between producers and consumers, with less middlemen or middle organizations. Now, I was hoping to give the floor to Marisa from Blocco d'Izquierda, but I don't think she's here yet. So I'll give the floor first to our Swedish colleague. But at least to the next speaker, who will be talking about how we can maybe relaunch Europe and restart a sort of a real green transition. So the next speaker has the floor.
That is me, I guess. Yeah, thank you very much for that. My name is Johansson. I'm a member of parliament in Sweden, representing the Swedish Left Party. I used to be a member of the European Parliament, and I'm at the moment spokesperson on climate issues in the Left Party, and I'm also chairperson of the Transport Committee in the Swedish Parliament. And I would like to speak upon the topic on the benefits of climate action, not only for the environment as such, but also from a class and gender perspective. And I will also slightly touch upon the corona pandemic. And all of us, we agree that we need a just transition, or rather a transformation that is not only will not only lower our emissions in accordance with our climate targets, but a transition that also makes the world more equal from a socio-economical point of view. That could imply that solely an ecological transition is not good in itself, but I would agree it is indeed. The climate crisis and collapse in biodiversity and other ecological problems hits the most vulnerable in the society the hardest. So to solve these problems would be to put the hardest hit in society first. Let me take some examples on this. In Europe alone, more than 400,000 persons die prematurely every year due to air pollution. mainly due to traffic and industry emissions. And the extra cost for the local bad air quality for the member states in the European Union's health budgets is on a staggering 250 to 1,000 billion euros. So we spend an awful lot on money on our health budgets just to regulate or mitigate problems with bad air quality. Who are the persons behind this figure? Who lives in dwellings close to noisy motorways and dirty industries? Well, it's not the rich people, it's the working class and lower income people. So building greener cities with a public transport of a world-class standard, perhaps free of charge, well, that would benefit the less well-off. And that should be our voters from the left. It would also be a very good political action from a gender perspective. Women tend to drive less car and rely more on public transport. Therefore, mass investment in public transport is not only good climate policy, it's also very good gender policy. And I think it's very important to stress that. So how could we achieve all this? Well, let me give you one example from my hometown, Stockholm. In Stockholm, we imposed congestion charges 2006 on car traffic in the city. We even won the following referendum on these charges, these taxes on car driving in the city, so to speak. And these taxes, they generate valuable resources that can be used to improve the public transport in Stockholm. And who benefits from this? Well, of course, working class people and also women compared to men as a group, since women drive less car and depend more on public transport. So tax on cars is, in other words, not only the right thing to do for the climate, but it's also phenomenal political action for working class and women. I could take another example on what we eat. And now I think Mr. Thomas Waltz, he touched upon that in a very good way, so I will be very brief. But we know that what we put on our dinner plate, meat or veggie or lot of sugars or no sugars, alcohol or drinking water, well, that would be say it's a personal preference. But we can't escape from the fact that the food and agriculture sector has a huge and usually huge negative impact on the environment and also on public health. So a diet towards more plant-based food would improve public health, and it would also save thousands of lives in Europe alone. And yes, that is a political issue, I think. It's exactly as Mr. Waltz mentioned, that we subsidize animal factories and industrial agriculture with billions and billions of public money. And so I think to scrap those subsidies, that would be very good climate policy, but it would also be very good for public health. And add to that, imagine if we could have more climate-friendly school meals in our schools. Well, in some countries you don't have free school meals, but in my country we have, and many other countries. Well, that would not only be a very good measure for the climate, it would also make sure that millions of students would eat healthy food in their school meals. And that is perhaps not to take for granted in many families where they don't have the means for eating good food. So needless to say, a green just transition would also be the solution of many today's societies. In all our societies, we now have mass unemployment. Investment in renewable energy, public transport, railway, plant-based food, as I mentioned, retrofitting and renovating of dwellings and public buildings, all that is urgently needed for the climate transition. But it would also create millions of new green jobs. I just noted that the Prime Minister in the UK, Boris Johnson, he was bragging about the 250,000 new green jobs his climate plan would deliver, in particular in the northern UK, where unemployment is a huge problem. I'm not a fan of Boris Johnson, of course, but I think he's doing the right thing to promise new green job, because that is the way we can win this battle. And it's not only about new jobs, dirty jobs, if I may say so, in the fossil sector. Many of those jobs, they will disappear with the green transition. But with an active labor policy instrument, the state can help workers to find new jobs in the green sector. The market alone cannot fix that. And I guess Asbjørn Wahl will, he's an expert on this, so I will not talk more about that. Let me conclude with saying a few words about the pandemic in which we live right now. The pandemic is a terrible thing. It kills people and it closes down our societies. It's because of the pandemic we sit the way we do right now. And I can talk for myself. I had COVID-19 and my whole family had COVID-19, and that's awful. And we still suffer from the effects from it. But this crisis also brings us some opportunities. If we look around in the cities in the world, especially in Europe, we can see that congestion in traffic has gone down an awful lot. And in many cities, they plan for building new and more green cities. We can take Paris as an example, where they have the plans for the 15-minute cities, where they should be able to reach all relevant public service within a bike ride of 15 minutes. I think that's very interesting, and we can see what opportunities this new situation will bring us. I can take my own city once again, Stockholm. We might close the city airport of Stockholm, the Bromma airport, very soon here in Sweden. And that would create big opportunities for building a new green city area right in Stockholm, with tens of thousands of new houses and new jobs, etc. And that is the kind of development we in the left should facilitate in our cities. So the pandemic brings us a window of opportunity, and it's up to us to use it. So let me conclude by saying that ambitious environmental policies are crucial in order to prevent climate crisis and collapse in biodiversity. But environmental political action is also phenomenal from a class and gender perspective. And we in the left we are the ones who best know how to combine these perspectives. And that, I think, is the role that we should play when the Green Deal is to be rolled out in our respective home countries. Thank you very much.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε. Ελπίζω να ακούγομαι καλύτερα τώρα. Άλλαξα τα ακουστικά μου. Είναι καλύτερος ο ήχος. Εμείς ευχαριστούμε. Ωραία. Και εγώ.
So thank you. Thank you. We'd like to thank you, Jens. And I hope that you and your family will feel better soon, of course. I understand that you've been suffering from the coronavirus, so wish you really the best to you and your family. So thank you for this presentation, Jens Holm. We will, above all, keep your conclusion in mind. Of course, we could have learned this lesson without the pandemic, but now, thanks to the pandemic, it is easier to come up with this conclusion and propose new initiatives. Now we have Christiana. Christiana will speak and give us the viewpoint of the Young European Greens. She represents the Federation of Young European Greens. She's a project manager. She'll speak about the different priorities and needs, but also different points of views supported by the youth. Christina, you have the floor.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Hello, my fellow speakers and everyone watching. I am project manager at the Federation of Young European Greens. For those who don't know us, we are a party political youth organization representing green youth organizations from all over Europe, from Cyprus to Norway and from Georgia to Portugal. This year, we're running a project totally focused on just transition to gather the perspective of young Greens on the priorities going forward. And I'm happy to bring you their voice today and at the same time highlight the demands and beautiful efforts of grassroots movements from all across Europe. Since the just transition is originally tied to the rights of workers in the energy sector, I want to bring especially two stories, and I chose two that are geographically close to two of those that are in this panel tonight. The first one is the case of the Baltic Pipe in offshore Denmark. This is a proposal to build a gas pipeline in the next 2 years passing through Danish territory. The purpose of the project is to strengthen the European fossil gas supply by establishing a connection between the Norwegian gas field and Poland. This is one example of an obsolete fossil project that risks locking Europe in the fossil fuel consumption and might make the transition impossible. The second story that I want to bring tonight is the one of Portugal, and is twofold, looking first at our home continent, Europe, and then elsewhere. Portugal approved a new policy document on the national energy strategy on hydrogen. Hydrogen is used today as an excuse from fossil fuel companies to keep on building obsolete fossil fuel infrastructure. Pipelines are suitable to transport both fossil gas and hydrogen, and especially now that the European countries are preparing their national energy and climate plans to access the Just Transition Fund, you'll find fossil fuel companies strongly lobbying for fossil-based hydrogen to be included in these energy transition plans, only because this is perceived as green. Sadly, only hydrogen produced thanks to renewable energy is really green. To the European Commission and to Timmermans, who think that there is, I quote him, a pivotal role for hydrogen in the path of the European Union towards reaching its climate goals, I say that we already have a long list of false solutions that do not want more to be added to. The Portuguese Deputy Minister and Secretary of State for Energy, Galamba, who approved this national hydrogen strategy, was found to have met mainly with private fossil fuel companies to discuss these energy plans, and is now faced with a scandal. In practical numbers, 22 out of 27 meetings were held with big corporations before a public consultation was open, and none of the 50+ meetings of the entire consultation process were scientists. None were academics, none were civil society organizations. But there is this bittersweet news to this, and that is that there was a 6-week-long public consultation before this new policy document was approved. We all surely agree that public consultations are great and that this is one way to perform democracy well. Sadly, this is not the experience of the grassroots we talk to. This is not the experience of young Greens working fearlessly to influence policymaking at the local and European level. If you talk to groups like Baltic Pipe and NATAC, who are trying to stop offshore gas infrastructure in Denmark, if you talk to groups on all sides and in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, opposing the East Med gas pipeline, another huge gas project planning to connect Israel to Italy through Cyprus and Greece, and part of the projects of common interest, but also moving away completely from the energy sector and focusing on other policy fields. Young people and all activists will tell you that public consultation does not work. The citizens' participation is not good enough, and that this is not the result of citizens not being sufficiently politically engaged, but on the processes and methods in place, which are complex, not accessible, and not inclusive enough. If you ask activists aiming at influencing policymaking, you hear that they feel disempowered by the bureaucratic processes and tireless efforts of giving input in public consultation, addressing European institutions, taking to the streets, sending written inquiries to members of the European Parliament during important votes, organizing protests, using non-violent direct action, raising funds for those in need, shutting down coal mines, doing activism, occupying public spaces to protect them from being built on, doing community support, showing up whenever they can. We are doing it all. Young people are doing it all, and they're not being listened. If you ask the people directly affected by this, the communities in the front line affected by all other unambitious attempts to solve the climate crisis, you see that they already are choking in the attempt to get an income, to find a job, to keep their job, to breathe clean air, to eat healthy, to preserve their mental health, to have their basic rights recognized and met. They are struggling to simply function in a society that is clearly not built for them. People are ready to fight because they really care about what they're fighting for. But they will not be able to forget that the flip side to their fierce activism and advocacy work is all the lobbying in the background. The millions of euros thrown in dirty lobbying, greenwashing, and youth washing with the only purpose of carrying forward this extractivist mindset that is no longer working. But they will keep doing it because they believe they deserve a decent life. And they do. This is the revolutionary demand of young Greens from all over Europe, that we should be focused on giving everyone a decent life. I hope everyone who dares to promote a just transition deep down understands that this is the key of a truly socially just transition. I hope they understand that a just transition will be feminist, because the vast majority of workers whose jobs need to be transitioned are male dominated, and reskilling and retraining for them won't solve the pre-existing gender injustices. We must redistribute household and all care work and eliminate the burden of non-paid work. I hope they are aware that there's no just transition without talking to the communities who are impacted first and foremost. Listening to their concerns and acknowledging their situation, we create space for a just process. Communities have a lot to teach us about the environmental resiliency of their territories. They have a lot to teach us about what makes doing their job decent, about what they need when they go home in the evening. Energy costs have been increasing across Europe since the 1990s, after the spread of energy privatization, which is often seen as positive for renewable energy and for community energy in particular, because ordinary consumers and producers of renewable energy were finally able to enter the market. The question is, though, if the market itself is an issue. Why aren't we talking about community-owned or democratically state-owned energy projects that would be able to offer very good, well-paid jobs in localities, rather than allowing community energy to participate in a deeply unequal neoliberal system, which is causing energy poverty? Local authorities, together with local communities, should be in charge of organizing the transition, not big private corporations that history has shown are always ready to capitalize on each and every crisis. I hope they plan a just transition that is just, but especially inclusive. This means leaving no one behind and actively working to decolonize our systems. To this point, I want to come back to the Portuguese story for a moment to make us all pause and remember that the consequences of European decision makers reach further away. 5 years ago, there were 15 concessions for prospecting and exploration of oil and gas in Portugal. Thanks to a handful of amazing local anti-gas and anti-oil campaigns and wider public pressure, most of these projects have been stopped. Fast forward 5 years to today, and you can celebrate a huge victory that there are 0 concessions for fossil fuel extraction in Portugal. But a victory in Europe can have also negative sides and negative ripple effects elsewhere. Indeed, the main Portuguese fossil fuel company, together with Shell and Total, are key players in gas terminals being developed in Mozambique in southwestern Africa. Development in the region has seen hundreds of families displaced and is causing spikes in biodiversity loss, especially destroying endangered species of coral and fish off the coast of Cabo Delgado, which is one of the Mozambique's poorest and most vulnerable regions, and where 2/3 of Mozambique's COVID-19 cases were diagnosed in the country. The first confirmed case of coronavirus in the country was a foreign employee at a construction site from Total, from where it spread throughout the region. While Total and all fossil fuel giants justify their expansion and exploration with their commitment to economic development of the global south, they don't think protecting the health of workers is part of this mission. We must take a critical look back into European history of colonialism and unlearn the Eurocentric point of view in our everyday life, in decision-making, and in the way we think of policy making too. There won't be a just transition if we keep counting on dirty energy coming from elsewhere to take care of European transition. There won't be any justice at all without dismantling the post-colonial structures and the economic exploitations and of Black bodies in the global south that still remain as traces of that. Lastly, for whoever uses the term just transition, I also hope that they're aware that young people will live longer with the consequences of this continuous inaction, and that for them, just transition is not only an energy transition, but a transition to a truly sustainable, inclusive, and welcoming society. Thank you.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε την Κριστιάνα για όλη την παρουσίαση του θέματος που έκανε. Σίγουρα η δίκαιη μετάβαση δεν αφορά μόνο...
Thank you for this presentation. Thank you for this presentation. It is true that it's valid for energy, but many other fields. Christina, you have mostly referred to the energy sector in your presentation, and you have we have understood that it's important to work on decarbonization, but to do so, we first have to help those regions which have this heavy industry, polluting industries that produce a lot of carbon emissions. So what we heard is not very optimistic, but when it comes to public consultation, there's a very nice, it's a very nice democratic procedure, but unfortunately, the citizens' consultation doesn't work for real. It's weak, and although the legal texts provide a framework for this consultation process with the society and civil society, although they foresee that all stakeholders should be able to speak out, including communities and NGOs, even citizens, well, unfortunately, in spite of all that, it's still not working. It's a missed opportunity, again, for more democracy. It's a missed opportunity because the organizations that are interested by this cannot speak out and share their stance. Unfortunately, the bad decisions are made, and the local committees are to undergo the negative impact on all that. We'll now give the floor to David Sid from MP Catalonia. You have the floor, David.
David, sí, tiene la palabra.
Buenas tardes a todas y a todos. Gracias por la invitación.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to also thank the interpreters, the work they are providing, the service they're providing for us. I am David Thib. I am part of the Green Party in Catalonia, and I am also MP for Catalunya Un Podem, that is in the Barcelona Town Council, with the mayor of Barcelona in coalition with the Social Democratic Party of Social Democrats. So as society, I believe, and also as political projects that we have right now, we have a double challenge. On the one hand is the fight against this climatic emergency and urgency, and this is what we have right now. It's a huge challenge that we have in the whole of humanity, but also to fight against inequality. So these are probably the main challenges that we have right now as a society. And we believe that we need to make compatible, or it needs to be possible at the same time, to fight against the end of our planet, to save our planet, and at the same time to continue fighting to make sure that people are able to make ends meet. Otherwise, we would have a contradiction that could bring about, as we have seen, different movements that are not positive. For example, we have seen the rise of right-wing movements. So we need to be careful specifically and make sure that the middle classes and the working class is able to see that the fight against climate change will not go against their own economic interests. If we don't do this, it'll be even more difficult to be able to continue with their fight against climate change. Specifically, I'm thinking about the system or situation that we have in Catalonia. So we have a productive system that is basically based on the following pillars. We have the building sector. Then we also have tourism. A second pillar, it represents 12% of the GDP, and this is linked also to the building sector of holiday homes. And then we have the industry, specifically the automotive industry. So these are the sectors in which our economy is based, sectors that contribute at great length also to greenhouse emissions. And they also require important number of employees. And right now we have an important industrial crisis in Catalonia, not only brought about by the COVID crisis or economic context, it has been accelerated in the last years and has only increased due to the coronavirus crisis. This has brought about the closure of one of the most important companies, Nissan, 15,000 direct employment jobs. And if we also take into account the companies that were linked indirectly to this company, would be talking more or less about 30,000 jobs that are going to be affected in Catalonia due to the closure of Nissan. And we need to head towards a carbon-free economy. We think this is essential for us, and this is one of the main elements of our political actions that we have right now at an institutional level, and the different policies that are being promoted through sustainable mobility from the Barcelona Town Council. And thanks to Ala Colau, the mayor, with a project that we have right now of having a very important green area in Barcelona. So to turn in a very green area, a large area of Barcelona. And we need to bet on the Green Deal. Without this investment, a huge investment of public resources that are going to focus on the decarbonization of the economy that will truly allow for a transition from the building sector, for example, to the refitting of buildings and to further invest in renewables. So to have a touristic sector that can be linked to other things that are more productive, to go from the automotive industry, car industry, well, analyze opportunities that might be represented by the electronic car. And we're trying to see how we can introduce new changes and new transitions. And we also have electric batteries. And then introduce changes regarding sustainable mobility. Most important company that we have in Catalonia right now is the public transport company. And you cannot externalize and relocate this company. You can do this with car manufacturing, but you can never do this with the public transport company that employs many citizens. So we're talking about tram and subway and the bus network that we have in Barcelona. So without this investment that can truly support these sectors, well, we need to see that we need to promote in this way the transition. We see the impact of climate change is becoming increasingly visible in Catalonia, in the Mediterranean, and we see very often we have drought, and it's not comparable to what is happening in other countries, of course, for example, in Latin America or other regions in the Caribbean. But it's true that we have increasingly more extreme climate situations, so important storms, again, cannot be compared to what is happening in other areas of the world, but we are seeing the consequences of climate change too in Catalonia. And we see specifically, we have these challenges regarding the climate change. They are here now, and we might have more consequences in the middle term, but at the same time, we have the economic challenges that are here right now and that are urgent and that need to be taken care of to also address the climate emergency. So to be able to make ends meet, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we save our planet. And another element I would like to present here as food for thought would be the following. In Barcelona, it's true that maybe not the whole debate regarding the climate emergency and urgency hasn't, well, it was clearly demanded by the Fridays for Future movement of young people coming out to the streets. And we see that there might not be a specific agenda regarding social movements as we might find in other regions. But we are identifying a change regarding climate emergency and urgency, as we call it, and climate justice, but that is also linked to mobility regarding pollution. So mobility of individuals, and they see this as something closer to their lives, all elements regarding pollution and its impact on health. There's statistics that show that 3,000 persons die per year in Barcelona due to the pollution. And it's quite of a paradox. The climate change is considered as something more in the long term, but one of the things that we're seeing increasingly and is facilitating changes in Barcelona and the whole area, the promotion of sustainable mobility that is able to reduce CO2 emissions. Well, we see that the perception of an important part of the population of Barcelona of persons that are not able to breathe the air they're breathing right now. They truly feel this, and this is having an impact on their health. And pollution is killing. So we need to find these elements, and Jens was mentioning this before. This is having an impact specifically on the most vulnerable that actually live in more polluted areas. And we see very often then the limitations regarding mobility, it has a class impact, but we see that 50% of the Catalonian population does not have a driver's license or doesn't have the possibility to own a private car. And it's another element that we might need to introduce in this just transition. And as it was said before, we need to introduce also here the element of fight against inequality. In European funds, in this sense, to address the current economic crisis, the next generation funds represent an essential opportunity. If we're not able to send these funds and allocate these funds to a new towards the new Green Deal or the Green Deal, well, we are not going to be able to introduce changes in these sectors that are responsible for CO2 emissions and greenhouse effect emissions, and well, they are generating jobs, but we need to have sectors that do not have these type of consequences, and this is essential for us to be able to fight climate change. So this is what I wanted to say, and thank you very much for inviting me again.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ για τις προτάσεις.
Thank you very much for your proposals and your ideas and the initiatives you have mentioned, David. And I must say, every time I hear the word Barcelona, I think about the agreement, the Barcelona Agreement for the protection of the Mediterranean Sea, which is, of course, something that is quite important for us and also key in terms of protecting the climate in general. And I think we have there an agreement that does try to do something for the climate. And then I'm also interested in what Christiana said about the way citizens' opinions are not always heard, and also how the funds and particularly the recovery money will be used and will be earmarked and will be also invested. And I hope that in the draft regulation that is being discussed in the trialogue now, I hope that this draft regulation will also clarify how the money has to be spent or where it should go, and hopefully it will go to the climate as well. I remind everybody listening to us that, of course, you can ask questions. So feel free to ask questions either in the chat if you're on Zoom or in the question and answer section at the very bottom of your screen. We'll answer those questions after all the speakers have taken the floor. We're now going to move to the next speaker, Inga. You have the floor, and thank you for being with us.
Hello, everybody. I am Inga Johansson from the Red Green Alliance in Denmark. I'm responsible for European affairs policies and committee. And I am also connected to the Transform Network, where we have held a number of climate conferences on how to combat climate warming, inviting speakers from all over the world. And so we are pursuing this quite ardently and pursuing the issue of climate policies, climate and how to combat climate warming. Of course, a fair and inclusive ecological transition is what we need in our society. This is what would help ordinary people, especially women and the young people. This is what we need. But what I also have been able to hear from all your contributions is that there's a lot of frustrations because the policies, the EU policies, our own government's policies, they don't work. They don't work sufficiently. They are either there's not enough ambition, or they are going in the wrong direction. And that's what I hear, and that's also my position. I think we have to focus on this in order to try to change this situation. And I think it is a role of progressive and left people like us, parties, movements, to try to combine our forces to do something about this. I don't think that a fair and inclusive ecological transition will be possible with the present climate policies. The problem is not only it is the EU Green Deal, it's a recovery program, it's the EU budget, but it's also the policies of our national governments. We have a very ambitious reduction program, 70% in 2030, but the policies do not meet these goals. And it's quite the same with the goal of climate neutrality in 2050, which is a goal of the EU. None of the policies at present meet this goal. And we are the ones who have a role in trying to change this situation. I think the main problem is that what we are presented with is a market-driven transition. It is one which is based on a close alliance with the big companies and the private enterprises. So, of course, there should be a cooperation with private enterprises. We want green enterprises, but they shouldn't be made the cornerstone of the strategy. That is what is happening. And that is why we have the lobbying and the enormous power they have. At the same time as they are profit-driven and geared towards growth, this clearly will not work. This means a focus on green growth and greenwashing of capitalism and not on a priority of fighting climate change. Therefore, the left and progressive forces need urgently to work for an alternative. It is obvious that what we need right now is a recovery package or recovery programs and a Green New Deal, which do indeed embark on a transformation of our societies, a combined economic, ecological, social, and feminist transformation. But there are different versions of a Green New Deal. Some are not based on the necessary system change needed in order to avoid being trapped into some form of green capitalism, which will not be able to deliver on the fundamental ecological and social change needed in the struggle against climate change. I will add, a fundamental transformation of our societies is not a fantasy. For a very long time, it has not been as realistic as it is now with the present situation of climate change and the global crisis situation. We have to seize this opportunity. I would wish to mention a few factors that are important in this connection. Green and just transition cannot be seen separated from a struggle for a speedy reduction of CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions. A fair and ecological transition could take decades, and we don't have decades. The speed of greenhouse gas reduction and of the just green transition is a decisive aspect of the climate struggle in the 2020s. And all climate research shows that the reduction of greenhouse gases is a disaster. We may very well hit global warming over 1.5 degrees in the 2020s, 2 degrees in the 2030s, which is a limit set by the Paris Agreement for the end of the 21st century. The present EU and EU member country climate plans and policies don't meet the Paris Agreement. They may not have it, they may have, as I already said, a target of climate neutrality. This is good, but the plans don't guarantee that they guarantee these goals. It is the role of the left and progressive forces to secure a fast reduction of greenhouse gases and a socially green transition. Left and progressive parties should cooperate closely with the climate and ecological movement and citizens groups to democratize the struggle and pressure for this. To avoid a continuation of business as usual on green growth, maybe coupled with neoliberal policies, we don't know yet how bad this will be. The left and progressive forces must pressure for concrete steps to transform our societies as soon as possible. The big question is whether a Green New Deal will do this, or whether a Green New Deal will not be able to distance its policies sufficiently from free market considerations. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that it is possible to make fundamental changes of our societies very fast. Important parts of industry, transportation, what is considered normal life, etc., was closed down in 2 days, 1 or 2 days. our societies, our governments were able to close down everything very, very, very fast. So it can be done. It showed us the crucial importance of the public sector, especially the health sector and public sector workers. For some time, advancing economic growth and spending had less priority than providing for the health and safety of people. In important ways, this also paved the way for an insight into the kind of priorities and transformation that we need in and of our societies in order to combat climate change. We should reduce non-sustainable consumption-driven growth. It showed how fast this could be done if the political will is there. This insight and situation, which is still there, should be used to begin the transformation. Thank you very much.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Πάντα τον εμπνευσμένο λόγο της Inga.
Thank you very much, Inga, for this intervention. I'm very sad to say that Marisa Matias from Portugal, who was supposed to be with us, won't be. So we're going to give the floor to the next and last speaker, Asbjørn. And Asbjørn is going to, well, say a few words about this transition and also help us to understand how we can ensure this fair or just transition. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Could I share the screen with you to show PowerPoint presentation? There we are. Okay, thank you. I'm a trade unionist from Norway, and also a political activist. I've been working in the Norwegian and international trade union movement in the last 30 years, including also with global warming questions. I've tried to address some of the things that is least discussed, I think, when we have meetings like this. We are very good, I think, to develop a list of excellent demands that we have to have. So what we want to happen is listed very well. How to come there, how to achieve what we want is another question, and much more difficult question, and it is much less discussed, I think. It's a question of strategies, it's a question of power, and also to identify who our friends and enemies are in this struggle. First, a little bit about the context. As some others have been talking about also, we are facing not only a climate crisis, we are facing a multiplicity of crises in society today. It is, in addition to the climate crisis, it is an economic crisis, a social crisis, political crisis, crisis of food, a more general environmental crisis, and so on. And if we study these and analyze these crises more closely, we will easily find out that these crises have many of the same root causes, which call for major social transformation. It's necessity in order to save the planet from the crisis we face. And that means also that these challenges and these crises, they represent both threats and opportunities. Threats, of course, everybody understand that, but there are also opportunities, because all these crises at the same time can contribute to make it easier in a way for people like us and trade unions and environmental movements and other social movements and so on, to mobilize people towards a fight against the development we see and which goes in the wrong direction. I think what is easy, what is important for us in this situation is that we have to find out what kind of struggle this is. And we can very easily find out that what has been going on since they started this climate change work at the international level with the Rio conference in 1992. It is almost 30 years, and they have still not been able to reduce the emissions. Emissions have increased with more than 60% since 1990. And transport emissions have even increased with 120%. So it is not a policy of reductions we face. It is a policy of higher emissions, more rapid growth of emissions than at any time before in history. So our conclusion should be, if we take this seriously, that the current regimes, the current power relations are not able to solve the crisis. None of them, in a way. And the climate crisis, as all of us know, will have massive social consequences. It will be job killer number one. It will increase poverty, destroy communities, lead to enormous social degradation, and causing emigration of unknown dimensions. So it will have to be at the core of the social struggle, the class struggle, or what kind of society we want, because that is really the struggle we face. What kind of society do we want, and how can we change society in that direction? That means part of the interest-based struggle in society, where there are very clear interests on both sides. Those who do not want to reduce emissions because they earn a hell of a lot of money in the fossil industry, and others that have to fight against that. So there is a contradictory interest. It is the class struggle. It is a question of what kind of society we want. And the climate problem is not primarily technological. It is first and foremost the social and political question, and the question of social power. We have most of what is required in terms of technology and knowledge to avert a climate crisis. What is our problem is that we lack the power to translate words into action. And that is what will pose the greatest challenge for us. This is a question of power and ownership. In other words, a fight for another social and economic model. So it is not only questions of what we want, but also how we are going to achieve it. And that is, as I said, mainly a question of social and economic power. The transition will incur deep social and economic restructuring, and that is the reason why it so obviously must be an interest-based struggle. It is not a question of a lack of political will and lack of ambitions. I mean, they are very ambitious, but the people in the regimes that are leading this policy today, they are very ambitious, but they are ambitious on quite different issues that we are. And because this is a fight of that sort, what we need are, I'm coming from the trade union movement, but it's the same for all social movements. We need organizations, trade unions, able and willing to fight. And it's this fight that is a bit missing today. There is at a very low level, and the neoliberal transformation of society have made social movements and trade union movements even weaker than before. And what I also want to admit as a trade unionist, most of the European trade union movement is today stuck in something I call social dialogue. I call it the social dialogue trap, in which they think that they can solve problems in the world through social dialogue. Social dialogue in Europe is as I see it, more or less seen to be a strategy in itself, a way to make progress in relation to the employers. However, to talk with employers face to face, even if that is necessary and important, it doesn't give us any power, any extra power, just another arena in which we can express our power. The power is not our attempts to convince the employers that we are right. It is our ability to organize and fight in the streets and in other ways. It is a power represented by the members, the ability and willingness to take action, which give unions strength. And now social dialogue has been delinked from any assessment of power and rather made to an overall ideology in the trade union and great part of the left in Europe. But if trade unions and other social movements also, if they do not represent the potential threat to the employers, to the capitalists' interests, they are powerless. So how come we have ended in this situation, which is so difficult for the trade union movement and the left in Europe? I think it all goes back to the establishment and the institutionalization of the class compromise. If you have discussed that in other situations, a social pact or social compact, or what it is called, social contract. But this class compromise was entered into by labor and capital in the middle of the last century, in a way, and formed the basis of a new policy with more balance of power, better balance of power than today. And it was more or less the power basis on which the welfare state was built in Western Europe. But this class compromise, whatever we think of it, was built on power. It represented the power change in power relation, which was a culmination of 50 years of hard class struggle in Europe. It was not the result of appeals to the employers, but of what we call in a trade union, teaching the employers a lesson through different sorts of industrial action. Now, obviously, form has been mixed up with contents. The shift in the balance of power has strongly pushed trade on the defensive. So what we need in this current situation is to widen the perspective, not only to talk about global warming, but a systemic approach to this, because it is so linked to so many other problems. And then we know that the endless economic growth and the ruthless exploitation of resources are embedded in the capitalist economy. Capitalism without growth is capitalism in crisis. We have seen it and we see it today. A narrow focus on environmental policy will therefore not suffice. It is necessary, but not sufficient. A much broader systemic approach is needed. The way we organize our production and our economy is at the center of this struggle. We need democratic control of the economy in order to carry out this struggle and be successful. Thus, as socialists, we also face not only a challenge, but also an opportunity to address the fundamental questions over time. And climate policy today is more or less energy policy. Fossil fuel is the main source of greenhouse gas emissions. So climate policy is first and foremost energy policy. And a rapid and just transition of our energy system require that it is brought under democratic control. We see it today in the fossil fuel. We are not able to stop and to reduce sufficiently the production of fossil fuel. And we are quite, many of us in the trade union movement are very aware that if we are going to succeed in doing what is necessary to do, we have to bring that those energy sectors under democratic control. And this will bring us in confrontation with some of the most powerful economic interests in the world. The fossil fuel companies were a couple of years ago, at least, had 7 of the 10 biggest companies in the world. And they are doing whatever they can in order to avoid going out of fossil fuel because it is so profitable. And there is also created a trade union network called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, was set up 8 years ago, and an increasing number of international and national centers and trade unions have to join this network in order to develop policies and alliances for this kind of struggle. We also have to realize and understand that climate change and jobs is a central question for trade unions, for everybody who has a job. Because very many workers are afraid of losing their jobs as a result of climate change mitigation measures. And that should be both understood and accepted, because we are not going to have the support of these workers if we are not fighting to guarantee their jobs and their incomes. So all these groups should have a guarantee, I think, of wages, of jobs, in order to being able to mobilize them for the climate struggle. All serious research, however, proves that climate change mitigation creates more jobs than it destroys. Global climate jobs networks are being set up. 1 million climate jobs is the name of that in the UK. It was the first one some years ago. And now these sort of organizations also exist in South Africa, in Portugal, in the Philippines, in Canada, in Norway, in Mauritius, and maybe others. And I think also it is extremely important to mix up this climate change struggle with other interests that will serve ordinary people. Climate policy cannot be reduced to a question of sacrifice, or what we must give up of hard-won rights. It is the opposite, the struggle about creating a better society for all. Climate struggle is part of that struggle to create a better society for all. Under neoliberalism, the balance of power has shifted dramatically. Wealth has been concentrated in a way which is unprecedented in our entire history. And the climate struggle, therefore, has to go hand in hand with a radical redistribution of wealth, from the north to the south, and from the rich to the poor. Thank you.
Εμείς ευχαριστούμε πολύ για αυτή την παρουσίαση και για την ανάλυση που προηγήθηκε από τον Ασπον. Τώρα νομίζω μπορούμε να περάσουμε, δεν ξέρω αν θέλει να προσθέσει κάτι ο Γιώργος, διαφορετικά μπορούμε να περάσουμε στην Ιωάννα για να μας...
Thank you for that. So I hope if there are questions, unless George wants to say something first, we'll ask Joanna to tell us what questions have been asked through the chat box in the meantime. So any questions? George, would you like to add something? No, no, thank you. Well, I was thinking that it is a very interesting discussion. It's a very interesting debate, by the way, and it shows that the movements and the parties are anxious to do something. They really would like to make sure that we move toward this type of transition, because this transition should not only be fair, this transition should be socially fair. So maybe we have to take a more systematic approach. So, of course, we all want a more fair transition, but we need to actually tackle those matters and actually walk the talk. So we need to be concrete and table very concrete and targeted proposals, also feasible proposals, things that we can fully implement. And as stated by Mrs. Inker, well, Ms. Inker from Denmark, you need to struggle there for fair transition to face climate change. So we need to make sure that we change the system. And Inker, you said it, and you were so straight to the point. The current production model is imposing too many limitations. So we need to change this model. Otherwise, it will be very hard to make the necessary changes to provide for a fair transition that also deals with climate change. So I think that now we'll listen to the questions, make sure that the different members of the panel can listen and react. Hi. So I will move on directly with the questions that have already been asked. So we'd like to start with a comment, if I may. It's a comment from Dimitri. So this actually goes to the first speaker, who was Thomas. Thomas spoke about intensive farming, intensive breeding, and so on and so on. So we'll give the floor to Dimitri, who can ask his question to Thomas.
Είναι δυνατό αυτό ή να μεταφέρω εγώ την ερώτηση?
So is that possible? Dimitri, can you speak? Or should you send us the question, or should I say the question? Can we give the floor to Dimitri? Can we turn on his camera or his webcam? Well, Joanna, I think it's better that you read out the question until we find a solution to the technical glitch. Okay, so this is Dimitri's question. Well, it's rather an opinion that he's sharing and giving, not asking a question. We'd like to understand Thomas's position. And he said that we need to strike the right balance between local farming and extensive farming. And it should take into account sustainable local development. And we should see to which extent we can contribute to a Green Deal that will meet such a need. Also, we need to see how we'll solve conflicts with other industries, like in the field of energy with renewables. And finally, how can we protect our countryside? We need to protect our countryside, and especially against the invasion of alternative energies, or renewables, to put it this way, because they're also very present in our countryside. Thomas, you have the floor.
I was still waiting for the translation to finish. Sorry for that. Yes, pointing on the energy question, it's a very good question, actually, because we see also developments under the sign of green energy production, which are not sustainable at all and which are not serving the purpose beyond maybe raising the price for certain agricultural goods. Like biogas plants, which are not using the heat, are not useful for the transition. Or also an overly use of wood chips for energy production is not the most sustainable way we can use wood, actually. I mean, I'm not talking about very regional, like small villages serving their citizens with heat by tubes. There are some small systems which make sense. But if we start to replace coal, as an example, for heating stations for cities with wood chips, this will cause an enormous pressure on biodiversity, on the hedges. This is causing in some parts of Europe that in forestry, even the roots are digged out. Every single little branch is taken with them and made into wood chops, which is a disaster for the forest land, for the floors, but also in terms of climate. So very much rightly so to point out on that question, if we want to get rid of the use of fossil fuel, namely gas, oil, and coal, we need to think about how we replace these CO2 chains in industry as well. So what are we going to make plastics from? What are we going to make oils from for machinery? What are we going to make all the chemical processes for well, a lot of goods of our daily need? What are we going to make that from? And so this is the role for CO2 out of agriculture and forestry, the leftovers like straw and so on that we cannot use to feed people can be used to replace oil, coal, and gas in the bioeconomy. And that's the much more useful way of using this CO2. And you're perfectly right to point out that just a general approach to put it all into a stove and transfer it into heat or maybe so-called eco-energy is a non-sustainable and not a good approach for the general EU politics. And I still exclude small little regional solutions, or maybe a farmer or a forester or an owner of a small piece of land that is still heating his own stove in the house with some remains, some wood he gets from his garden or from his small forest. I'm not talking about that, but big industrial solutions in that case for energy is not a good use. You're perfectly right with your question.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, Τόμας. Να συνεχίσουμε με την ερώτηση που μας έχει
Right,
υποβάλει.
thank you for this reaction. Let's move on with the question asked by Alain. Can we give the floor to Alain? Hi.
Ακούμε πολύ καλά.
All right, well, thank you for giving me the floor. I simply would like to say that if we want to win the battle on climate change, we need to have clear demands and things that people can identify to and understand. And in France, we're preparing our struggle on transportation, for example. This is certainly one of the most important ways to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We like to have free public transport in France to actually foster this usage by citizens at the expense of the cars. And we'll also like to develop a new type of goods transport per train, per river, or per sea. So do you think it is useful to carry out this struggle jointly at the European level through a major investment plan in railway transport, public transport, and so on? That's my question for you. Thank you.
Is this question aimed to me or another speaker?
Νομίζω ότι θα μπορούσε να απαντήσει όποιος από εσάς νομίζει ότι έχει κάτι να συνεισφέρει, αλλά σίγουρα απευθύνεται και υποθέτω στο Yes και στο Diet.
No, anybody could actually react to this. No, anybody could react, of course, feel free. Jens?
Could I ask you?
Yeah.
Also, since I have been working in the International Transport Workers Federation for so many years and have been organizing campaigns, I fully agree with you that in the transport, free public transport is a very important demand, and it is growing, and it is even happening here and there. Luxembourg has turned to free public transport. Estonia, first in the capital, but now in the entire country has turned to free public transport, and other cities in Europe and elsewhere is also moving in that direction. I think it's a very good issue to unify over the borders and create international campaigns in order to achieve something that on that area. When it comes to goods transport on road, that is quite a more difficult issue of two reasons. One thing is that the neoliberal policy all over Europe now, which is destroying the railways in a way as the main transporter of goods. But another thing is that the need for transport, the need for goods transport is not created in the transport sector itself. It is an effect of what is going on in the rest of the economy, where you produce, what kind of things you produce, and so on. So, and those transport need is, since you can't affect them much inside the transport sector, it is very difficult for transport workers to change that. But it is well worth doing. But that's one of the reasons why I think it is more important to widen the perspective and have a broader struggle that involve the more general development of society. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε. Θα ήθελε κάποιος ακόμα να απαντήσει.
All right. Thank you for that. Any other comment from one of our guests? Jens, would you like to say something more?
Yeah, I could say just briefly, when I went on my first Interrail trip, that was from Stockholm to Spain, and this was about 20 years ago, it worked perfectly well. I bought my Interrail ticket and I made all the seat reservations from my small town in northern Sweden, and it worked really well. Today, it's very complicated. Why? Because we have a completely deregulated railway system now in Europe, and the train companies compete with each other instead of cooperate with the timetable, with the linking night train to an early morning train, etc. So that is a huge problem we need to tackle. And also, I think the question was also if we should invest more in a sustainable transport system. And yes, we should do that. And we should link this system to each other. Most of the airplane fares we could actually replace with high-speed train. And we can see if you construct a high-speed link and you can transport from one city to another city below 3 hours time, people will not take the plane. They would prefer the train. So there is an awful lot to do here, but we need to challenge the deregulation system, and we need to cooperate more instead of competing.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ για αυτή την απάντηση. Να προχωρήσουμε
All right. Thank you for this answer. Thank you. So maybe we can move on with the next question. Maybe we have somebody who would like to speak. Rami Hervé Brami, can you speak?
Un exercice un peu difficile pour moi.
So I sometimes cannot hear the translation. I don't find the right buttons apparently, but I would like to say thank you. Thank you for this initiative. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their presentations. And here is my question. This year, the forum is taking place remotely. Why? Well, because we're facing the COVID-19 pandemic. This is probably coming from zoonosis. And I think that at the European scale, we should rather focus much more on preserving biodiversity across Europe, but also around the world. But this implies deep changes, especially changes in the way we consume and produce. So I think that if we preserve biodiversity, we'll also preserve climate. And so we'd like to know what the different guests have to say about this. Thank you.
If I may, I mean, climate crisis and climate warming is one of the biggest threats to biodiversity as well. And I think it's not going to be enough to secure biodiversity on some places somewhere to solve the climate crisis, unfortunately. But I admit that this seems to be a zoonotic disease directly linked to the way we live, and that this implies major changes in how we live and how we also produce, especially food, because I mean, agriculture and forestry are the ones which really work on the massive amounts of land. So there's a key issue there. But I think to solve the climate crisis, we need much more than save our biodiversity.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Συνεχίζουμε με την ερώτηση που έχει κάνει η Μανουέλα και αφορά κυρίως τον Jens.
For the reply. We'll move on with the next question. We have a question for Jens, I believe.
No, I wanted
Is that
to
right,
add,
Inga?
I wanted to add something concerning the biodiversity and the COVID-19. I think also COVID-19 is also a result of our way of living, of globalization, of the how we produce and send our production to the other end of the world, and we travel extensively. At least we did before the COVID crisis. So I think it has a lot to do with that as well, and that has well, it is connected, of course, to neoliberal the neoliberal economy, and we will have to change that. We will have to change that, and we will have to have more control over people talk about going back to normalization, but I don't think there is a going back to the kind of life and the kind of production we had before the COVID crisis. Quite simply, I don't think it's possible, but it's quite true. It is a globalization, and so we have to have more deglobalization, in fact, and there's been a lot of discussion about deglobalization, which is quite useful, in fact. Thank you.
Θα ήθελε κάποιος άλλος να προσθέσει κάτι σε αυτή την ερώτηση ή να προχωρήσουμε?
All right, thank you for that. Anybody else would like to say something here? Any reaction? No? Then we'll move on with Manuela.
Yeah, thank you.
You have the floor, Manuela.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for the interesting presentations. I have a short question to Jens Holm. Jens, you have mentioned that there were congestion charges introduced for cars going to the city of Stockholm, and that there was a referendum and that actually people voted in favor of keeping it. So I just wanted to know how you did this. I mean, how did you communicate politically to win the support of the population? Thanks.
Yes, that's an excellent question indeed, because usually people tend to vote no to new taxes. But in this case, the referendum was 2007. and people in Stockholm, they voted, a clear majority voted in favor. Why was that? Well, I think it was because the congestion charges started as a congestion fee on a trial basis 1 year from 2006 to 2007. And that was perhaps the first time in decades we found a measure actually to reduce the circulation of cars in the central area of Stockholm. And people noticed that when there is 15% less cars on the streets, that's a huge difference. On the same time, we used the revenues from the fees on cars, and those were invested in the public transport system. People noted that too. There were more buses, there were more metro, more trains, etc. So people are not stupid. If they see that we can take money from the cars and we can put it into public transport, people will enjoy that. And that was why I raised this issue, because usually we have a car lobby, and the car lobby is huge, and the car lobby try to describe car ownership as a human basic right. It is not, especially not in cities. I understand on the countryside you might need a car, but not in big cities like Stockholm, Gothenburg, or Vienna, or Oslo, or whatever. It's exactly like David Sid said, that half of the population in Catalonia, they don't have a driving license, if I got you correctly. That's the case in Stockholm too. An awful lot of people, they don't own a car. They have a car when they need to go to the countryside or something, and then they can rent it or use carpool or whatever. So the congestion charges in Stockholm is a success story, I think.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ, Jens. Θα κάνουμε μία τελευταία ερώτηση, πολύ σύντομα, γιατί έχουμε μόνο 5 λεπτά για να κλείσουμε την σημερινή συζήτηση. Απευθύνεται σε όλους σας και αφορά το τι μπορεί...
5 minutes. I think we have a question here which is for everyone. What can the European left do in the next 5 coming years? And also, how can we propose a true transition plan to our citizens, and this by avoiding the current definition proposed by the European Union? So by doing this, we should speed up the process towards a fair transition. So unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all the questions. I'm sorry for that, but we'll try to answer that at another time. So who would like to answer this question, but very short, please? All right, maybe the youth representative.
Sure. I mean, from my speech, I think it was clear that we need to really include citizens in civic processes, and it's easier done at the local level. So local authorities and local governments have a huge leverage to talk to the people closer and really ensure that while fighting with throughout the barriers also that are sometimes existing because of the regulations that are decided at higher levels of politics, but the ones that can be addressed already at the local level should be addressed as soon as possible. This is fundamental, and when local regulations and local governments have the opportunity to do so, it should be done not in the next 5 years, in the next 5 months. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε, Χριστιάνα. Θα ήθελε κάποιος άλλος να...
Thank you very much, Christiana. Anyone else from the panel, please, wants to add a final comment briefly, please, because we have to close this discussion. Asbjørn, please.
Just maybe put out the provocation at the end of the meeting, but I think it will be necessary in the foreseeable future to discuss the situation on the left and in the trade union movement in Europe. Because my opinion, my view is that both the left and the trade unions are currently in a deep political ideological crisis in Europe. They puzzle when it comes to in which way they shall meet or develop the policies towards the European Union. Should they leave? Should they stay? Should they try to change it from inside? All these discussions have been part of discussion over the last few years, but it is not really taken up as the decisive question, I think, which is important for the left in Europe. So a discussion on strategy and the way forward for the left is necessary.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ όλους για τις πολύ ενδιαφέρουσες προσεγγίσεις.
Thank you very much to everybody, to our panelists, for your contributions. We have 5 minutes left. I'll give the floor back to Christina and Yorgos for a conclusion, please. And thank you very much.
Ευχαριστούμε, Ιωάννα. Εγώ δεν έχω κάτι να προσθέσω. Ευχαριστώ.
Thank you, Joanna. I don't have much to add. I want to thank our panelists and the guests who agreed to share valuable time with us and participate to this debate. Obviously, a lot more could be said, but we'll stop there. Yorgos. Well, first, I'd like to thank the interpreters for their help. I think it's not an easy job to do in the circumstances, and they're actually willing to work even a bit longer beyond the time that was foreseen. I think from the discussion that we've heard, I have, and I think we can all, we've all gained, I think, valuable insight and ideas. I think that whether we're ecologists or come from any other family of the left and the Greens, I think a lot has been said that was extremely interesting. And from all the various speeches that I've heard, I think somehow there seems to be no way we can really change our climate policy. We can't do that if we simply support the current policies and our current governments. And I think everything that we've said goes into the same direction. We need, for example, to be able to come up with a valid solution in terms of public transport, for example. And the word public here makes a lot of sense. So I think we need more public policies. And if we do that, then we can achieve a lot. I'd like to thank the organizers of the Forum of the European Left. Thank you to everybody who's contributed to organizing this event. Take care of yourselves, be careful. We live bizarre times. And so I'd like to conclude with a final wish. I hope the next time we meet, the next time we participate to this European Forum, hopefully it will be in a nice part of Europe, in a nice place, and we have the ability to be really more together. And hopefully that's how we can eventually find solutions and achieve our objectives. Thank you very much, and see you soon in different conditions, hopefully. Thank you.